Hello everyone, welcome back. After making all these master swords, I decided I need a plinth to hold them in. What am I gonna do with them all? So how do you make a plinth for the master sword? Let's get started. So the first thing we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna make a template. And to do that, we're gonna use some cardboard. The plinth is vaguely a triangle. So to create that, we want to use a square. Even though this thing I'm tracing is technically a triangle, it's actually called a square because it's 90 degrees and it helps you to create things that are 90 degrees. Now that we got the general shape of the plinth created, we just want to double check everything and make sure it's all equal. The square I used is a little too pointy, so now we want to round off the edges. I'm just going to measure out equal amounts on each side of the corner to make sure I get something that's pretty close to perfect. This is important because it has to look the same on all three sides. So I'm marking all of my measurements on each corner and then I'm just going back and rounding them off the same exact ways. Once I get done with this, I can come back with a metal ruler and an X-Acto knife and cut this thing out just as if I were drawing down the edge of a ruler. The only difference being we're not using a pencil, we're actually using a razor blade. And I think we've all bumped our fingers against our pencils when using a ruler before, and it's made a little bump in our drawing. But in this case, it could be a little more detrimental. Therefore, you want to double check where your fingers are before you start cutting. That way you don't have little slivers of yourself shaved off.
Yikes.
Now we have a template for our plinth. I'm just going to shave off a little excess that I messed up on. Get out of there. Then trace around it onto some styrofoam. Yes, we're going to make the plinth out of styrofoam first, even though that's not going to be our end product. Right now we're just creating the master for our mold. Whenever you're making a mold, it's a negative copy of something, and the thing you're copying is called the master. Now, is it just a coincidence that I'm using the master sword to teach about mold making?
I don't know.
So what in the world am I doing now? Well, I realized that the plinth is beveled, and I didn't leave enough room on my styrofoam for that, so I had to move it over. Time to move over to the styrofoam cutter. First, we're just going to remove some of the excess so I can actually get in here and cut this the right way. Now, how are we going to get the bevel to come out the same on all sides? I'm way ahead of you, my friend. I'm going to tape a dowel to it. I'm taping it parallel to the direction we're cutting so it'll kick the back end of the styrofoam up to the appropriate angle. No, I'm not inebriated. These first couple of cuts are just a test run. Now on to the real thing. As you can see, I'm being very slow and careful. That doesn't stop me from messing up later, but we'll talk about that when we get there. Now that we got one side cut, we just want to move our dowel over to the next side that we're going to cut. Once again, parallel to the direction we're cutting. I used masking tape for this, that way it sticks well enough, but it'll also come back off without tearing the styrofoam to bits. Now we'll move it to the final side and cut it out as well. That'll just leave us with the corners. For that, we'll repeat the same kind of process, but we'll run the dowel rod parallel to the corner. Now that we have the shape for the bulk of the plinth, we just want to create the little ridge that runs the whole course of the top. In order to accomplish this, we just want to trace out our template again onto a thinner sheet of styrofoam and then cut that out on the styrofoam cutter once more. Once that's done, we can just trace around the inside of this triangle about a ½ an inch to the inside of the line. So I'm just going to mark that out with a ruler and a marker, and just keep that width going all the way around the entire triangle. After that, I took it back to the Styrofoam cutter and cut it out, and now we're just putting a generous amount of glue on it so that we can adhere this piece to the top. As you can see, I'm using a silicone basting brush to smooth my glue out. I think it needs a little more glue. On second thought, maybe not. Yeah, better go ahead and put it on there. Using a silicone basting brush allows me to peel the excess glue off once it dries quite easily, where if I used a regular brush, I would have to wash it out very good in order not to ruin it. There we go. Now we'll weight it down and check on it in the morning.
24 hours later.
In order for this to be a plinth, a sword has to go in it. So we're going to measure it, mark it, double check it, and then we'll draw our seeker line right down the middle. We'll also do the same thing going the other direction to make kind of a crosshair. Now I'm going to take this opportunity to put some rock-like texture on this styrofoam. And what has a better rock-like texture than an actual rock? To be honest, I think this is a piece of asphalt that I picked up out of the parking lot, but it's close enough. Now we need to turn this styrofoam into something that's hard. And to do that, we need to measure out some Epsilon Pro. One of my more popular videos is a tutorial on how to use this stuff in depth, so I'm not going to go into great detail in this video. It comes in a part A and a part B. You mix them together and paint it on your styrofoam to make it incredibly durable and strong. Now you want to stir this stuff for a full minute, so just know that I am on fast forward right now. And as always, scrape the sides, scrape the bottom, make sure you get it mixed up really well. Once it's thoroughly mixed, you can paint it on with a brush. I recommend a disposable brush. It can be washed out, but it's quite a chore. We just want a nice even application of this all over the entire surface. We might not even need this, but I just want it to be strong enough to mold. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to apply this stuff to the bottom. I just want the sides and the top, because once we make the mold of this thing, it's just going to be discarded. Another thing this is going to do is allow me to make some repairs on some of the boo-boos that I made. I'm going to be using Bondo, and I don't want the Bondo to melt the styrofoam. So this will make a nice little barrier between the foam and the Bondo. A lot of the epoxies and things that I use don't really require 24 hours to set, but I like to give it 24 hours regardless, because I'll usually do this stuff right before I go home for the day, and then when I wake up and come back to work, we'll be ready. It is the next day, and this stuff is dry, and I'm just cutting off the excess that dribbled down the sides of the foam. Now I think this thing is looking pretty decent, so it's time to make some repairs. And for this, I'm going to use some automotive body filler. So we're going to put a little bit of the filler on the paper, and put a little bit of the hardener in it, and mix it up very thoroughly. One's red and one's beige, so you'll have a sickly pink when you're done. Except for in my case, I reused some paper, and it looks like I got some of my silver spray paint on there. Whoopsie. So I accidentally cut this giant chunk out of my foam when I was using the foam cutter. Usually I'm pretty careful, but it's really difficult to do anything when you have a camera in your face. I'm still adjusting to making videos. I globbed the body filler on pretty heavily, so now we're just going to use the belt sander to smooth that out and to make everything look like it's pretty unified. Now we're going to make the cavity that the sword's going to go in. We're going to use another defective Master Sword casting for this. As you can see, I've already been robbing parts off of this thing. Now I'm just gonna square off this cut I made and clean it up a bit. Looks pretty good. When I put on my styrofoam hardening epoxy, I accidentally got rid of some of the definition in this recess here. I want this to look really clean, so I'm going to use a Dremel tool here to get that nice edge back. I'm going to give this whole seam here a good once over to make it nice and square. And I'm going to finish the job of squaring all this up with this file. Believe it or not, this epoxy files and sands really nicely. The nice long flat edge of this file is what allows me to even these pieces out because it hits the high spots without hitting the low spots, leaving me with a nice, clean, straight edge. Now I'm just making a little pilot hole in here in our epoxy so that I can push this little piece of a blade in here and make room for our sword later. And she fits her like a glove. I previously mentioned squares in this video, and now I'm using one to make sure that the sword is 90 degrees and not tipping over in any direction. Achievement achieved.
Oh my god.
Now that the test worked out, I'm fully committing. Now we're going to use my old friend the bolt cutters to cut off a dowel rod out of this all thread. Now we pick out a drill bit the same size as the all thread. Put down some scrap wood so we spare our table. And then drill a hole for our dowel rod. We'll be gluing this in place using cyanoacrylate glue, also known as AC glue or super glue, and we're using an accelerant to speed up the drying times because I'm a busy man. We're going to cast this plinth in concrete, so it's time to make a mold. Cut off a slab of water-based clay, and we're going to make a thin layer all around our master. The clay is going to be the substitute for our silicone for the time being. This will allow us to pour our outer shell that's going to house our silicone mold, to give our mold a little more rigidity and strength. Right now I'm being really careful to get under that dowel rod because I want my mother mold to encase it and make it a lot stronger because the sword piece here is going to be part of the mold. You can also see that I'm being pretty careful to keep some of the definition around my original shape. This allows me to use less silicone and make sure my mother mold is a good fit. As you can see, I'm just joining these clay pieces together via some traditional means, nothing overly complicated or complex. Now I'm refining and trimming this shape up with a loop tool and one of my favorite tools, my thumb. As you can see, I have beautiful and proportional thumbs, unlike some of these crafting YouTubers that you might see. Now I'm taking all manner of tool and trying to clean out around those dowel rods some more. The loop tool is a really wonderful tool. I've already spoken about it before. This silicone kidney is also a really nice tool. I'm using it like a giant modeling tool to smooth out my sides. Now I'm going to cut out some keys for registration using a ruler as a guide. That way all these turn out the same. These keys will keep my silicone mold lined up properly inside the mother mold, or the shell if you will. Now I'm going to put a few more smaller keys around the outside. I'm going to use the original piece that I cut out as a boilerplate to make sure that all the rest of them are the same size. Now I'm dipping the handle of my modeling tool in some water so I can make some more keys for registration. Then you can push it in the clay and give it a little twist-a-roo. This leaves a cavity for the mother mold resin to fill later on. Now I'm just using a silicone modeling tool, some water, and my thumbs to make sure these keys are joined to the rest of the clay properly. That way we get a really nice mold. Now I'm just going to needle this a bit with my needle tool, trying to get some more gunk out of there. Remember, I want this all thread dowel rod to be a part of the mold. Now I'm going over the whole thing with a damp brush to smooth everything out and refine it and make it ready to cast. I'm also going to put a little flange all the way around the bottom just to reinforce the mold and make it a little bit stronger and more durable. It should keep it from being too flimsy as well. For our mother mold, we're going to use Plastipaste 2. It's a product from Smooth On and it comes in a part A and a part B. And I would definitely recommend giving the part B a pre-mixing because it seems to separate whenever it's been sitting a while. Also, I would give part A a thorough shaking as well. Just shake it all around like it's a puppy. Nah, I'm just kidding. That's it. I would never shake a puppy. If you can't tell, it's a 2-to-1 ratio with 1 A and 2 B's. Now you just want to mix this up really good, scraping the sides, scraping the bottom. You'll eventually get a nice, even, goopy paste. It'll kind of be the consistency of instant mashed potatoes when you're done. Just a lot more sticky. That reminds me of a joke. What's brown and sticky? Give up? A stick. Now we just want to get a nice even coating over the entire thing. Now I know this doesn't look even, but trust me, we're getting there. I'm going to use my gloves and I'm just going to go to town on this. Once we get it on there, we'll let it dry and then we'll put on a couple more coats while it's tacky. And voila, we have a mother mold. Sorry, wrong sound effect. Boy, this is embarrassing. Right now I'm digging out the clay so that my master will be easier to remove. Now we just want to gently remove our master because it is made out of styrofoam and we do need to reuse it. After getting all of that out, we need to get all of this clay out of here. The clay was just a stand-in for the silicone. As you can see, I'm saving it all, that way we know how much silicone to use later. I'm dumping the clay into a Tupperware, filling that Tupperware up with water, marking the line, removing the clay, and now I'm just seeing how many cups of water it takes to get back up to that original water line. That's the amount of silicone that I need to pour. For this, we're going to be using OOM0030 from Smooth On. It comes in an A and a B, and it also comes pre-dyed so we can tell when we've mixed it well. This silicone has an easy 1-to-1 ratio, so I'm just going to add the amount we measured out earlier, plus a little bit extra just in case. Proper amounts are in place, time to get mixing. Now, I am running my drill on slow, but I think I have my video on fast forward, so don't think I'm running it this fast. The faster you run this, the more air bubbles you're going to get. It'd be best to put this in a pressure pot now and remove out all the bubbles. I don't have that, so I'm going to show you what I do instead. Sometimes I'll take my orbital sander and turn it upside down in my vise and remove the sanding disc off of it. and vibrate some of the bubbles out. But this time I'm just going to pour very, very thin streams, and that seems to pop most of the bubbles on their way into the mold. Sometimes you'll see me pouring a little thick here. I'm getting a little impatient, but you want to keep those streams thin if you don't want bubbles in your mold. I don't care if there's a few flaws in this because it's supposed to look like really beat up old stone or concrete. Now that I got a little silicone in the mold, I can go ahead and squish my master down in there. I probably could have coated the sides a little better before I did this, but it all works out. Now all we have to do is fill this the rest of the way up. Again, I probably should have poured in a lot thinner stream than I'm doing right now, but like I said before, we're okay with a few flaws. That's just free weathering. Since this is styrofoam, I noticed that it started floating whenever I was done pouring the silicone. So to keep it down where I wanted it, I put a big old jug of tempera paint on top. With silicone, cleanup is easy. You just wait for the silicone to dry, and then you peel it out of the bucket you were using. Also, I spilled a few drops on the table. Now that they're dry, I can just rub my finger across them and peel them up. The next day, I had a little trouble getting the master out of the mold. Yeah, I had to completely destroy it. But oh well, we don't need it anymore. Let's just add a little bit of Sackcrete. That's right, we're going to cast this in concrete. You can buy this by the bag at your local hardware store. It runs anywhere from about $4 or $5 to about 20. It just depends on the formula. As you can see, I poured my concrete first, and then I add my water later. I do this so I don't add too much water. You add a little bit at a time because it doesn't take much to become too much. Now to put a little jelly on this mold so that it acts as a mold release and we can get our casting out of here when we're done. I'm putting it on very generously because I'm uncertain of how easy it's going to be to get our casting out of here. If you're in a hurry, you may want to use a different mold release because this petroleum jelly tends to darken the concrete until it eventually wears off. I'm just going to pour a little bit of concrete in, and then I'm going to make sure it gets into all the nooks and crannies and there's no air bubbles. And then I'm going to pour the rest in. Here's where everything goes south. I didn't have enough concrete, and I thought this thing might be a little heavy, so I decided to fill the inside of it with wood, which made it very brittle and very weak. So I don't recommend doing this. Even though it's a little more heavy, it'd be well worth it to use all concrete. As you can see, it's starting to break as I'm getting it out of the mold, and it turned out horrible, but we were at least able to make sure the sword fit, and we got a proof of concept. I've been to the store, I got more concrete. Now it's time for round 2. I mix up my concrete the same way and fill my mold again. Now I'm going to use a trowel to smooth out my concrete so that the bottoms of these look really nice and professional. You can see me holding the trowel up at an angle, and that is the key to this smooth finish. Whatever direction you're pulling the trowel, just make sure you tilt it up on that side. I put more petroleum jelly on here and no wooden blocks inside. Let's see if this time it comes out a little easier. And the answer is obviously no. So now I'm drilling little holes in the outside of my mother mold so I can push objects through and try to press my concrete block out of my mold. I finally got it to come out, but I also broke the mold. And now the sword blank won't come out. Let's apply a little pressure. That might be a little too much pressure. Now I'm going to have to gently get it out of here, and nothing says gentle like a hammer and a drill. So I just picked out a drill bit that's about the same size as the screw I'm going to use, and a few that are smaller than that. That way I could drill a pilot hole, a smaller hole, and work my way up. Now I'm going to fasten this screw in here and I'll have a handle. Ah yes, we need to do a little more gentle hammering. And just a little gentle hammering later, Well, it wasn't the original design, but now it's removable. You know what they say, third time's a charm. Again, we're going to put on some mold release, but this time we're putting it on inside and outside of the silicone. That way that silicone jacket can pop out really easily. I'm also going to be extra generous around the sword because I don't want it getting stuck again. I'll mix up another batch of concrete, but this time I'm going to make it a little looser than I did last time and a little looser than I normally would in the hopes of getting rid of some of the air bubbles. Just like last time, I'm going to put a little bit of this Sackcrete in here and poke and prod it around in all the corners and edges, jiggle it around, basically gonna just show it a good time. And even though I don't show it, I will be using the trowel to smooth out the bottom. Another day has passed and it is time to demold our plinth. Guess what? It doesn't want to come out again. After a little bit of persuasion, I decided I have to remove the sword. I'm glad I decided to repair the mold this way. Yes, I really should be using a wrench to do this, but I left all of my wrenches at home. Now that the sword is out, I can remove the outer casing and then remove the inner silicone mold and pry this thing out of here. Here we are, I'm going to put a little pressure on it and then just give it a slight little tap here and there, and that should be enough to free it up unless there's some major problems. Now I'll go ahead and put that back in case I want to make a few more. With that out of the way, I want to patch a few things and add some texture, so to do that I'm going to be using some dadgum repair mortar. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. I like this brand, it seems to do pretty good, so we're just going to trowel out a little heap here, poke a little divot in it, fill that divot with water, and then we're going to mix it up. Just like with the concrete, you want to add a little bit of water at a time so that you don't make it too runny. It doesn't take much. You can apply this with the trowel or with a squeegee. I just got totally barbaric with it in a minute and started using my hands, which I can't recommend and I don't recommend. This is a great opportunity to repair where the sword goes in. By the way, I found out why the sword was sticking in the mold. The sword is thicker closer to the tip and thinner closer to the bottom, which created a kind of undercut. Now I don't have to worry about that anymore. Now all we need to do is some more weathering. I'm just going to ever so gently tickle this with my ball peen hammer all over. This will give it the appearance of age, making it look like it had lots of mishaps over the years. Yeah, you like that, don't you? The final bit of weathering that I wanted to do was to add some flocking to the plinth. I wanted it to look like there was moss growing all over it, or at least I thought I did. I ended up doing one with barely any moss on it and one with lots of moss on it. That way I could just see which one I liked better. Most of the time moss only grows on the shadiest side of something, so I'm trying to put more moss on one side than the other. I'm just putting regular PVA glue out everywhere I want there to be moss, and then I'm taking flocking and just pressing it into that glue, and when the glue dries you won't be able to see it anymore. Once that dries, you can just lock it into place with some isopropyl alcohol and PVA glue. And with these finishing touches added, it's time to roll the glamour shots.